this movie is based on your book, and then you wrote the movie. Let's first start with how you got Deepa involved in actually directing it.
Well, it's more that she got me involved. We had been talking to each other for a while about working together. I mean, ever since I had seen her film Water, which I liked very much. And we were actually talking about maybe adapting a different novel of mine. Initially, we were talking about my novel Shalimar the Clown. And I happened to be in Toronto on book tour. And I had one free evening, and I said I'd have dinner with her. And we were talking about that. We were talking about this other book. And then, for reasons which I think even she says are mysterious to herself, she changed the subject. And she said, by the way, who has the rights to Midnight's Children? And I said, well, as it happens, I have the rights to Midnight's Children. And she said, well, can I do that one instead? Which until that moment had not crossed my mind. And I found myself saying, oh, yeah, all right, yes, you know. And that was the deal. It was completely unplanned, unpremeditated on both our parts. And I think the moment we had said this to each other, we looked at each other and thought, fuck, what have we got ourselves in for? And then, you know, the next day we just took a deep breath and thought we'd just go for it.
Now, this was a film that you had tried to do a few other times before. So what made you think that working with Deepa would bring this about, especially because she wanted you to write a script you didn't want to write?
I mean, I didn't know how it would work out. I mean, I had to an extent given up on the idea of there being a film of Midnight's Children. And I thought, you know, I thought that was all right too. You know, the book was there and that was plenty. But then I just felt very deep passion in her for the book. You know, she talked to me about what the book had meant to her. And it was obviously so personal to her that I thought, okay, then this is not just it's not just a gig, you know, it's not just she's going to do a film of a well-known novel. It's a personal project for her, and she has a kind of real passion for it. And I've always been, you know, I've always been a sucker for passion. And so that made me feel that she would be the right person to do it.
So let's talk about how you got the role. You met with both. Hey, we're back. There we go.
There we are.
You met with both Deepa and Salman and the process.
Yeah. Well, originally I was in Toronto as well, actually, and I was working on a film there, and sort of through somebody I'd done a play with, actually, who had worked with Deepa previously, he said, you know, Deepa's up there and you should meet her. You should just get dinner. And we had never met, and I obviously was aware of her work and loved it. And so we ended up meeting in Toronto in a sort of a social way. And sort of similar to the passion that Salman was talking about, we started talking about Bombay, which is where my father's from. I grew up in London, but my father's from Bombay, and I visited all through my life. And we just started talking about the city and different experiences I'd had growing up and things like that. And I think maybe somewhere there a little seed was planted. I didn't know. I left, none the wiser. And then she called me a few months later. I was back up shooting and sort of said, well, look, we're thinking about you for this role, and I, you know, promptly passed out and then woke up again and passed out and went crazy, and then said, okay, fine, cool. And we spoke about it a bit, and then I met with Salman, and then it was some months later when actually at a public screening of one of her films, she sort of casually mentioned in a talkback that I would be playing Salim, which is something that up until that point I was not aware of myself. So that was another sort of what the fuck moment, but a very exciting one.
Well, we were, one of the things that we felt, you know.
It's when you start talking.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Darkness falls. Yeah. Well, one of the things we had felt about the character of Salim is that we wanted ideally to discover a fresh face. That we wanted somebody to come to that role without a lot of, if you like, sort of movie baggage, you know, without a very highly developed persona, because he played a certain number of parts of a certain kind, you know. And we also both felt that the character of Salim had to possess a certain kind of vulnerable sweetness. You had to, as an audience, feel almost protective towards him, you know, as these increasingly terrible things happen to him. And so that's what we were looking for. We were looking for somebody new and somebody with those qualities. And that's what we both came to feel that Satya would offer, and did, I think.
And how many other people did you look at? Because, and what was the passion that you found in him that you said, this is the perfect character?
Well, it was, you know, we just liked what he offered us. You know, he talked to us both at quite great length about it, and we just saw Salim in him, you know, and I mean, after that, you just have to make it happen when you're doing the film. But we felt, both of us, that he had that character within him to play, you know. And you know, we did talk to other people, but never seriously, actually, you know. They were, I mean, the wonderful characteristic of the Bombay film industry is the astonishing power of rumor. So the number of major Indian movie stars who allowed their publicists to leak to the press that they had been considered for the role but had turned it down, you know, was really very, very substantial. And most of these people we had never even spoken to. You know, we never even picked up the phone to talk to them. But there they were in the press turning the role down after we had begged them to do it. So there was quite a lot of that. And I mean, I guess I had a very quick education in movie bullshit. You know? But truthfully, we never really seriously considered anyone else.
And I understand that the rehearsal period was not actually rehearsal of the script. There was something that you guys did with Deepa that was about a bonding exercise. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, we spent about a week in Bombay with the majority of the main cast, the main family, and some of the surrounding characters. We did a workshop with a wonderful theatre director who works out of Delhi mostly, called Neelam Mansingh. And we did a workshop that was based on an Indian dramatic treatise called the Natya Shastra, which is a sort of a Bible of Indian theatre, if you will. And so there are many different exercises and many different techniques, and also techniques that have been, you know, folded into and developed in different Western theatre practitioners, such as Bawal and people like that. And we did a bunch of ensemble building exercises that ranged from you know, just getting very comfortable with each other physically, emotionally, playing games. Not a whole lot of it was specifically to do with the characters, and none of it was to do with the script. We didn't look at the script once, but save for a rather disastrous read-through, after which we were all like, oh my goodness. Because read-throughs of scripts, for those of you who have not seen them, are generally rather tricky affairs. But ultimately we did this workshop and developed, as it were, sort of a storehouse of memories or of emotional connections with each other that we could then hark back to when we were shooting different scenes in the film.
One of the things we said to everybody that we cast, I mean, many of these actors you may well be unfamiliar to the audience here. Many of them are really very well known indeed in India. Siddharth, for example, who plays Shiva, is one of the big stars of South Indian cinema, Tamil cinema. And Shreya Saran, who plays Parvati the Witch, is also, you know, a considerable star in South Indian cinema. Rahul Bose, who plays General Zulfikar, is probably the leading actor, certainly in the independent film sector in India. And you know, many of them, Rajat Kapoor, many of these actors, Shabana Azmi, are big figures, you know, in the Indian cinema. But the one thing we said to all of them is, this is a movie with no stars. This is a movie in which everybody is the star. It really is a kind of ensemble piece, and we compared it, both Deepa and I separately and without conferring, compared it to like a Robert Altman ensemble piece. And we said we have to have actors who will approach it in that spirit. You know, nobody can be a diva. Nobody can believe they're better than the others, or ask to be paid more, or get, you know, better limousines, or, you know, fancier hotel rooms. There's going to be none of that shit. Everybody is going to be exactly the same. And that's the spirit in which, if you can't come in that spirit, don't come, you know. And all of them simply, I think, left their egos at home and came into the shoot and worked through what was an incredibly arduous shoot, very, very long hours, incredible numbers of locations in quite a tight shooting schedule. And they just gave it 200%, you know, and I think the result of that is on the screen.
Were any of them, I'm assuming that many of them have read the book. How many people here have read the book?
All right, all right.
So
Some of you.
I'm assuming that many of them read the book. Were there any times that they asked about the script? Because there were a lot of subplots that you obviously had to remove. Did any of them ask about those, or ask if they could be replaced, or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, yes, I think many of the people who were in the movie were people who had been admirers of the book, you know, and that was one of the things that attracted them to the film. But I think quite rapidly what happens is the script takes over, you know. That's what you're making. And I think that is what happened. I mean, there were one or two sort of rather sad moments. For instance, one of the first decisions we made in the scripting process was to drop something that's very important in the novel, which is the frame narration. You know, in the novel, Salim is retrospectively telling the story to this woman, Padma, who works in the pickle factory, you know, where he ends up. And they discuss the story as he tells it. And on the first day that Deepa and I discussed the script, I said that I thought that had to go because that was a literary device. And I thought if in the movie you're constantly interrupting the movie to have two people talking about what happened, it breaks the audience's feeling for the story and emotional connection to the characters. And I thought we can't do that. You know? And she said, oh yeah, I was going to suggest that, but I thought you wouldn't like it. You know, that was one of the moments at which we understood that we were sort of trying to make the same film, you know. But unfortunately, we had both separately spoken to a very fine Indian actress, suggesting that she might play the role of Padma, the person to whom Salim tells the story. And we then had the really difficult task of telling her that she couldn't do it because we'd cut her whole character out of the film. And that was tough. But no, on the whole, I think what happened is that very quickly it just became a question of the script that we were shooting, you know, which is in a way slightly different than the book. And Deepa and I started referring to it not exactly as an adaptation of the novel, but as a relative of the novel. We said, let's imagine that this is like a first cousin of the novel. You know, so there's a close family resemblance, but it's sort of a different thing. You know, and that was the way in which we approached the whole thing.
So Deepa actually doesn't use shot list, which I did not know until I read the press kit on this. Mm-hmm. As an actor, this was your first major films, but I mean, you're in The New Girl, so you know what a shot list is. You know how to deal with marks. What was that like? How did you move around on set? What did you do in order to accomplish each scene so that you actually had a full scene to edit for?
Right. Well, yeah, as you say, Deepa doesn't use shot lists. It's very, the blocking of the camera and of the actors is very much derived in the moment of rehearsal from the space and from the actors that we're with. And Deepa really, her sort of primary focus, as I think is reflected in the film, is a kind of emotional truth. I think that she really searches for these moments of and you know, bare honesty, and that is something that doesn't come the first time that you do it, and doesn't come when you're sort of being told now you need to hit this mark at this moment and hit that mark at that moment. And so I think what would happen sort of procedure-wise is we'd rehearse the scene quite a lot every day, and we'd work with the lines and we'd work with the space and we'd sort of feel it out. And then once we all felt, and Deepa felt, that we had gotten sort of a good model for it, we'd start working with Giles. And one of the very interesting things, and I'm sure Salman can speak to this as well, that you noticed is that for a film of this epic scope, it's majority handheld. I mean, vast majority handheld. And for the length of the shoot, and also some of the scenes and situations we were in, it was really an amazing feat of Giles's to capture such beautiful images and also deal with this very intense environment. And so a lot of the time, once he came into play, it would turn into this dance between the actors and the camera crew. You know, you've got 5, 6 people scuttling around one room in a corner holding cords and lights and cameras, and then we're moving freely. And it actually turned into a really organic and very exciting process. That
decision to shoot almost the whole film handheld was very, very late. I mean, that really wasn't part of the original concept of how it would be shot. You know? And I think there were a number of reasons for it. One is simply time. I mean, we had an enormous amount to get shot every day. And the fluidity of assuming you happen to have a genius as your lighting cameraman, the fluidity and speed with which you could work with the handheld camera, was helpful. And the other was what Satya is saying, is that Deepa decided that instead of the camera dictating to the actors would determine what the camera did. And so the actors were given freedom in the space and freedom to, and the camera would work, around them. And I mean, a very unusual way of working, but I think it bore fruit. And it's really, I think Giles Nutkins deserves huge praise for what he's done, because, he made it look like we had $100 million to spend, and we did not. Life of Pi had $100 million to spend, and look what they did with it. No, sorry.
I like Life of Pi.
There lots of people do.
Just so everybody knows, they shot this film in 70 days with 65 company moves. 65 company moves from location to location with 70 days is an enormous undertaking, which says a lot about the passion that the filmmakers have, because you're dead after 70 days of shooting. It's just
you're dead after 30.
Huh?
You're dead after 30, and then
and then after that.
Yeah. Fortunately, in the script, lots of them die anyway.
So, and another interesting note is the writer and producer was actually not on the set the entire time. Would you like to tell about that?
Well, I had a book to finish that I was writing, and by that stage, by the time that we got to the business of actually shooting the film, Deepa and I had, worked on this so long and in such minute detail that I thought I don't need to be there, And I know enough about movie sets to know that if you don't have a real job, then everybody falls over your feet and you're the most annoying person there, and it's also like spectacularly boring. So I just said I wouldn't go, and I said, go make the film. And we would talk. Initially, we would talk almost every day. And sometimes that was very difficult because, well, first, there's the time difference, but Deepa was shooting these incredibly long shooting days, and she would be physically at the point of, falling down in a faint. And then she would try and call me to discuss what she wanted to do the next day. Or she'd text me. And she was almost totally incoherent quite often. In fact, there was one day when she sent me this text, and I actually thought somebody had stolen her cell phone because the text was so illiterate, and really impossible to understand. So I texted her back saying, "Is this really you, or who has Deepa Mehta's phone?" And then she called me and said, "It is me." And I said, "But I can't make any sense of what you've written, And then she tried to explain it to me, and I still couldn't make any sense of it. So I said, "Look, you need to sleep." So she did, and we just came to the conclusion that we can't do this. You can't make a film by having to have a script conference at kind of 6,000-mile distance with whatever it is, 10.5-hour time difference. It just can't be done, So in the end, I said, "Look, just you know what I think. I know what you think. Go do it. Go and do it. And I'll see you when the rush is ready." And then I did get quite involved in that phase of it. Yeah.
And we will get into that in a second. What was it like when you suddenly had the 1-week work stoppage because of the political situation in Sri Lanka? In case you're not aware, the production was shut down quite suddenly. We were on the set, the nose was on, I was ready to do the scenes, and then suddenly we had a company-wide meeting and we were told that the production had been shut down. There had essentially been some pressure put on the Sri Lankan ambassador to Iran, and he had sort of revoked our shooting permit. That was a nerve-wracking moment, to say the least. But there was a real, we had already done quite a lot at that point, just financially, I think, and emotionally. I think there was an investment that we knew was going to get cashed in on. We knew we were going to make this movie. And Deepa and David, our wonderful producer, really
never let the energy sag. I mean, I went back to Bombay and stayed with my grandmother for a few days, and sort of production did shut down for about 4 or 5 days, but there was never any feeling of, we're packing up shop or we're closing down. I mean, they really had a drive and a passion, and eventually solved this situation quite quickly.
Yeah, we were fortunate in that before we began to shoot, we'd had personal approval of the president of Sri Lanka to make the film, because Sri Lanka wants to develop itself as a location for international films, and they saw this as being a kind of advertisement, if you like, for that. And so, in fact, they were very cooperative, with us a lot of the time. We had these military scenes to shoot, and they'd say, "Would you like a tank?" And, helicopter, yeah, exactly. Those materialized too. So they were there. They couldn't have been more helpful in a way. And then came this curious thing out of left field from Iran. I mean, Midnight Children is not a book they've ever paid any attention to. But somebody, it's very hard to know how high or low this was, but somebody decided to mess with this. And for a minute, it did shut down the production. But then fortunately, and as it happened, the president of Sri Lanka was out of town at the time this happened. So it did get shut down, but he came back a couple of days later and we were able to get to him. And he immediately said, no, that's nonsense. Go ahead and make your film. So fortunately, it was a terrifying moment because we'd shot half the film, and it would have been really calamitous if we hadn't been able to shoot the second half of the film. But everybody held together, I mean, this camaraderie that had been built up amongst both the cast and the crew. I mean, everybody just held together. And I think when we got back onto the set, I think there was a kind of renewed, even increased sense of sort of mutual solidarity to get this thing done. But I must say there was a moment later on. I mean, after the big shoot was finished, we had a lot of second unit stuff to do around India. To get opening shots of the film in Kashmir and stuff that we shot in Delhi and Agra and Bombay and around the place, and we had become a little bit jumpy by this point, about things that could go wrong. And I remember there was this day when the last reels of film were being put on a plane in India to fly back to Toronto, and I was sort of sitting there on the end of the phone saying, would you please tell me when the plane's wheels are up? Because I just want to know that the footage has left the country. They were sort of, it's like the end of Argo, There was this moment when the plane took off and I got this call saying, it's okay, it's in the air. And I thought, we've got the film, the film is now in our possession. Nobody can take it away from us. Nobody can seize it or embargo it or do anything that crazy. You begin to think of crazy stuff, and fortunately, none of that happened. So, but yeah, it makes you jumpy when people try to shut your film down.
So in a way, you're Ben Affleck.
In a way.
In a way. So you talked about the editing process. Oh, actually, before we do that, let's just ask this one question, because the biggest change that I really see in the film is the ending, where instead of him dying, he is alive. So for those of you who haven't read the book,
there's not a spoiler at all.
Yeah.
He dies. He breaks apart in 600 million pieces, which is the population of India at the time.
Or he says he does.
Or he says he does.
But how did he write it?
Why? It's kind of like Life of Pi.
That may be the worst thing you've ever said to me.
Yeah. Then I was young. Why did you not have him have that happen in the film?
Well, one thing is technical, which is that this idea he has in the novel of physical deterioration, of actually physically falling apart, making literal the metaphor of falling apart. In the novel, you can, as a reader, you can decide to believe it or not believe it. You can decide whether this is just something he feels and is saying, but is not, if you like, objectively true, or you can decide that it is objectively true. The book leaves that open, if you like, to you. Film being just a very concrete medium, you really have to decide what you mean. You know, is it subjectively true or objectively true? Does the audience see it? Does the camera watch it? You know, etc. And in the end, we decided that we wouldn't do that. We just would leave, you know, we wouldn't put that aspect of his self-portrait into the film. And then gradually, we found ourselves working towards this strangely optimistic ending. It's very odd to me that Midnight's Children in film form has somehow acquired a happy ending. Or a happier, it's not exactly happy, you know, because there's a lot of pain and loss along the way. But that he somehow finds himself with this reconstructed family unit, you know, of a mother who's not his mother, and a father who's not his father, and a son who's not his son. And there they all are celebrating Independence Night. You know. And it becomes a story of survival. You know. And I suppose of the two of us, Deepa is the optimist. I think she wanted a very strong note of hope at the end of the film. And in the end, I mean, I always did what she said, basically, which I found was by far the best policy, because otherwise there was lots of trouble. And so the film found its way into this other note at the end. But I mean, I actually think there's one of the reasons it works is that I think one of the big shifts between the novel and the film is that I think the film is much more nakedly emotional than the novel. You know, I think the film is a film where the emotions are all out in front, whereas in the novel they're kind of ironized and comically deflected, and you know, I don't think you cry when you read Midnight's Children. But I think I'm happy to say that quite a lot of people cry when they watch the movie. I don't know if any of you cried. If so, good for you. And I think, therefore, because of that slightly different tone that the film has, that kind of emotional completeness at the end of the story just felt like it worked in the context of the way we told the story in the film. It's different. That's what I mean by it being a cousin rather than an exact photograph of the book.
Let's talk about the editing then. You get everything back. You now have this tableau that you're working with rather than shot lists. And I believe she had mentioned something about she was first looking for the emotion. That was the most important part